All right, every one of you could please take your seat. Good morning. Today is Tuesday, July 24th at 9:30, and I am convening this meeting to order. I'm Tam Dodek, board member. To my left is board member Didi Diadamo. To my right, board member Joaquin Esquivel. Executive Director Sobek, if you would please introduce the staff.
Yes, good morning. To my left is Chief Counsel Michael Loffer. To my right is Chief Deputy Eric Oppenheimer. Janine Townsend, clerk to the board, is being assisted today by Courtney Tyler.
All right. A couple of quick announcements. Please take a moment right now and identify the exit closest to you. It might be behind of you, actually. In the event of an emergency, an alarm will sound. We will evacuate using the stairs, not the elevators, down to the first floor and cross the street to meet up in the park. We will wait there for the all clear signal before returning. Second announcement, actually let the record show that we have now been joined by Chief Deputy Director John Bishop. Second announcement, this meeting is being webcasted and recorded, so when you provide your comments today, please come up, speak into the microphone, making sure that it's turned on, and begin by stating your name and affiliation. And lastly, and most importantly, please take a moment and put all your noise-making devices to silent, vibrate, or off. Even if you think they are so, please take a moment and double check. Triple check if necessary. All right. Making sure that there will be no annoying buzz to disrupt our proceedings today. We will now turn to the public forum. This is an opportunity for any member of the public to address the board on a matter that is not pending before us. Do we have any cards? All right. Not seeing any, we will now move to consideration of the minutes from the July 10th board meeting, and I will need to abstain from this item, but is there a motion?
Motion.
So I'm prepared to second it, but because I recused myself on the one item, I guess I'd have to abstain on the one item, and then we wouldn't have enough votes.
So a couple different things. We'll unpack that. First of all, there is no need to second, so we can dispense with that. And if you want to note for the record that you can still approve the minutes for an item that you abstained from, and that's fine, because the minutes are just a memorialization of the record.
And I believe the minutes recorded your abstention on that item.
Yeah, it's just that it also recorded other things that I don't have any knowledge.
Well, that can be noted for the record. We'll only need 2 votes to actually carry the item anyway, so that'll be fine.
All right.
No, the item in question that was already approved last time. All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye, with changes, noting for the record. Thanks.
So moved. We now have uncontested items 2 and 3. If there are no speaker cards for those items, I will thank the staff for your excellent work on these 2 items, which is now reflected in the non-controversial, all well-loved matter of this item. Do I hear a motion? Are there any questions?
Move adoption of the uncontested items 2 and 3.
Second, and thank staff for the great work on those 2 items.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
So moved. Aye. So moved. Ms. Sobek, we are now on item number 4. Actually, before you move on that item, I understand that item number 5 will not be heard before 11. At this rate that we're going, are there any objections to me moving on to the informational items after item 4 is completed? No. Not seeing any. Annalisa.
So for item number 6, which is an informational item, we do have members from Department of Water Resources that would be joining us. So if it's possible to give them at least a heads up, in terms of maybe
There's
10,
heads up is right now.
Yeah, I will let them know. and see if they're able to make it over from their building.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, with that, Ms. Sobek, please introduce item number 4.
Yes, thank you. The State Water Board staff are requesting that the board authorize the executive director or designee to provide $2.5 million in Proposition 1 water recycling research money in the form of a grant to the California Water Hub. So we'll have a presentation on this item by Jim Mon, and he will address other staff who are also presenting.
Good morning, board members. Again, my name is James Mon. I'm the Assistant Deputy Director for the Division of Financial Assistance, and I will be making a presentation on item number 4. Assisting me is Zach Miller from the Office of Chief Counsel. So you can see here from the background information, the Department of Energy is planning on investing $100 million, $20 million per year for 5 years. This will be a competitive process, and there are teams based here in California who are looking to get that funding and compete for that on the federal level. These teams have been identified with the 2 Lawrence Livermore and Lawrence Berkeley labs, as well as potentially other members who will join that team. In order to compete with that, they are looking for state matching funds that they would be able to include in their package as far as commitments. The technologies that they would be developing would benefit California. Just again, the Water Code section 79144 does provide authority for the Water Board to be able to do this type of work under research and development of the water recycling funding. Prop 1 does have funds still available. The board might remember we had that starting, I believe, in Prop 13, but we do have funds available. The original amount was $12.5 million. Some of those funds have already been committed, and I'll talk about that in a minute. The funding commitment would be to support this team again for them trying to get the $100 million from the federal government. Again, they will speak more to where the process is as far as their application and how they're trying to secure those funds. We have representatives here today to talk about that. So in doing an analysis from a staff level to inform the board, we looked at the amount of money that was available, the $12.5 million. 1% of that is already committed by the board to direct and indirect potable research, reuse research. That leaves 1%. The intention previously for that was to fund pilot projects. As you can see, we're still working on that application process, but we have had 2 agencies contact us with proposals. There is no process yet, but they've reached out to us, told us what they're looking at doing. That totals about $2 million. So again, the 1% to help the board understand that would be about $6.25 million that is in, we'll call it that pot of money, just to help you understand what kind of dollars we're talking about here. So based on that, it is the staff recommendation that $2.5 million would go as a commitment to the team, the winning team, if they win here in California, at $500,000 per year. Now, we put conditions on it in the resolution that it would only go to the awarding team, that it would have to support eligible water recycling research, meet that criteria, and that the winning team would agree to all the terms and conditions that we normally set. We also put a sunset date We figured it was generous, June 30th, 2019, but we didn't want the board to commit this forever and ever. It just seemed prudent to put a set date in on it. So they are here to speak. I don't know if you have questions for me at this point or if you'd like to hear their presentation.
I'd like to hear the presentation. Assuming that it's a concise, interesting presentation.
Good morning, board members. My name is Gary Darling, and I retired from the public sector after 34 years, the last 13 and a half years as the general manager of Delta Diablo in the East Bay, serving over 200,000 residents wastewater recovery services. I wanted to spend one upfront moment here to thank you. The last time I approached this board, my agency was the lead agency in the Western Recycled Water Coalition, consisting of over 25 entities pursuing recycled water development. And at that time, we had information that showed that there was several $1 billion worth of recycled water activity moving forward in California, but without help would not move forward. And so this board started a very low interest loan program for recycled water projects, and I have found out that to date you have secured loans for what amounts to be over 150,000 acre feet of brand new water for the state of California, and several tens of thousand acre feet are still in the process. And I don't think you get enough credit for that. I think that you and your staff, should be at the top of the list in terms of praise. And I would encourage you, as this project unfolds, to do press releases and to get the credit that's deserved. This is a great investment for the state of California. If you look at that 150,000 acre feet and you want that as a highly secure block of water over 5 years, you need to multiply it by 5. So if you were comparing that to a surface water storage project, it isn't hard to imagine that's 1 million acre feet of a facility to produce that kind of water. So thank you very much for that. I think that was very forward thinking on your part. So that leads me to today, and as Jim gave a great presentation on what we're here for. There's been no time in my career, certainly, that I have been aware of the entities that are coming together to form an innovation water hub. And so, as Jim pointed out, the federal government is going to invest $100 million over 5 years to do this. And the hub will be explained to you further in detail, but it's composed of the national labs that have to compete for the funding, academia, and we've got, lots of academia that are interested in this. And as you know, there's a lot of great ideas that come out of academia that end up staying on the shelf. They do not ever get to market. So these are the types of things that we're going to help move forward. There's also a great partnership with public utilities, private utilities, and manufacturers that are coming together. So no time in history that I'm aware of has there been this kind of a consortium that's being built to focus on how to reduce the amount of energy that it takes to manage water. And you know that the go-to technology out there is reverse osmosis. It was invented in California. And so part of our message today is, as we develop this innovation hub, is to keep it in California and to have the state, have you as a partner at the table helping decide where this investment is going to move forward. So things like nitrate removal, selenium, chromium, all the things that are problematic to our communities and to the agricultural business and just businesses in general in the state of California are on the table. So I'm very excited to introduce this team. Today we have both the Lawrence Livermore National Lab, represented by AJ Simon, who will give a presentation, and from the Berkeley Lab, Peter Fisk is also here with us. So exciting time. Interested, definitely want the state to be a partner and invest in this is a great moment. And so, like the recycled water moment that we had here in this boardroom, I view this as the same type of opportunity. This is a threshold moment that I think that will evolve into some very great things for the state of California. So thank you. I'm going to turn it over to AJ Simon now.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you, Jim. Thank you very much to the board for the opportunity to present this extraordinary moment when the Department of Energy is poised to invest $100 million in water R&D. Just as a reminder, and Gary referenced this, the first reverse osmosis membranes were a California invention. So if you go all the way back to the 1950s and 60s, really advanced water treatment and management of salinity in a way that taps into energy efficiency in the modern era beyond, beyond thermal and distillation methods. That goes right back here to the state of California and to the great universities that are located here. However, reverse osmosis has reached very close to its potential for desalting seawater. And if we look at its efficacy for desalting other waters, particularly abundant brackish and otherwise impaired waters here in California, it's not even close to its theoretical, physical, let alone its economic potential. So that technology accounts for more than 60% of capital and operating costs for managing water, particularly in the Central Valley. And fundamentally new, much lower cost and much more energy efficient systems are needed to manage the impairments that are critical to making California's water resources more sustainable. And these technologies could be applied to fit-for-purpose recycled water from a number of uses, and for new drinking water, for industrial cooling, offsetting other uses of water, and for agriculture. That technology is just the kind of thing that the Department of Energy wants to invest in. DOE has been talking about making this investment for over 2 years now. In fact, DOE convened its first meeting to really get serious about research in new water technologies all the way back in November of 2015, and held a number of information gathering events from there, from a roundtable that was held back in Washington, D.C., to a written request for information that my laboratory and Peter's laboratory and a number of other institutions were able to respond to, workshops that were held last summer in the center of the country. And over that time, Congress has appropriated 2 full years of funding. So as Jim mentioned, $20 million a year over 5 years. 40 million of that has already been committed by Congress to the Department of Energy to invest in new water technologies. Congress put the language an energy water desalination hub, really emphasizing that salts and ions that impair water are the chief impairment that we should be going after. They released a notice of intent to fund just last month, about 4 weeks ago, last Friday, and we are anticipating that the request for proposals will be coming out likely next week or shortly thereafter. The investment will likely be the largest federal investment in water treatment since the Office of Saline Water back in the 1960s. As indicated on the notice of intent that's on this slide, the Advanced Manufacturing Office will be the entity within the Department of Energy that administers the program of research. And what they have titled this is an energy innovation hub. That's very specific language coming out of the Department of Energy that describes a modality of funding and research, which is this 5-year, $100 million investment that's designed to be a collaboration led by the national laboratories and including academic and industrial researchers. The quote that you see in front of you is actually taken directly off of DOE's website. These innovation hubs are multidisciplinary, so we're bringing together researchers who know things about the fundamental separations and also, say, the systems engineering that needs to go into that, and water discharge requirements and water supply constraints that understand both the fundamental physical phenomena and how to manufacture equipment to get there. They bring together researchers from, as I said, universities, industrial partners who are critical to actually making this research impactful, and the government laboratories, and looks across science and engineering and possibly non-science areas. So we're going to be doing research on how this fits into markets. There are 4 existing hubs, so this is a successful modality of research proven out over the last 5 years. Those that are up there, as you can see, are in areas completely unrelated to water. And the DOE has proven time and again that it can do this and manage this kind of large interdisciplinary research. In the upper left quadrant for critical materials, the rare earth elements that are fundamental to a lot of our clean energy technologies, for improvement of nuclear reactors through modeling and simulation, leveraging the big investments in computing that exist, for advancing battery technologies, and that research, of course, is changing the way transportation is becoming more environmentally compatible, as well as finding completely new ways to manufacture fuels without having to dip further into our fossil resources and continue to load our atmosphere with CO2. So those hubs are in existence. Many of them have players from California. Many of our partners, both on the Livermore team as well as the Berkeley team, have participated in this and know how to move this research forward. We have and are continuing to add partners from the academic, industrial, and government researchers who will actually be doing the research itself, as well as interfacing with the folks who will eventually manufacture water treatment equipment, and the municipalities who will need to adopt this to make their water supply more sustainable. And in fact, all of the hubs that have existed to date have very strong relationships with education and non-governmental organizations that try to bring awareness to emerging technologies and how those can be adopted. The notice of intent, the DOE identified 4 technical areas of interest, and all 4 of these, I think, impact California's water resources. They've asked that the winning consortium do research in materials, so that means better membranes, filters, and sorbents for desalination, whether that's taking the salt out of seawater or taking the nitrate out of groundwater. Better pipes and pumps for more efficient treatment, conveyance, and distribution so that we can get water from where it is to where it is needed. Better processes. As I said, reverse osmosis has a lot of headroom when treating brackish water. Other processes tailored for brackish and recycled water, which has levels of salt that are often too high for many of the uses that we'd want to put it to. Modeling and simulation that then helps integrate the fundamental science and technology knowledge with the design and the operation of full-scale systems, and data and analysis to focus the R&D investment to the highest impact areas, both for the state of California and beyond. So the activities, as well as the outcomes from these activities, will help the board meet its mission. And the items in italics on this slide are quotes from the board's mission statement. So we're looking to develop new technologies that preserve, enhance, and restore California's water resources. For example, nitrate salt removal from impaired groundwaters. To develop the technologies that enable fit-for-purpose systems that allow us to then allocate these new water resources to the appropriate use and use it efficiently. So desalination then of recycled water, whether it's for direct or indirect potable reuse, or for more water efficient irrigation or more water efficient industrial cooling. Developing the analysis frameworks that helps inform policymakers about the potential of these new and alternative and cleaned up water resources. And then finally, the education and outreach platforms that I referenced earlier, not only building up our universities and national labs ranks of researchers, but also reaching out K through 12 education as well as community college education for the next generation of workforce that will be operating these technologies, and putting out information, unbiased information based on just the science and technology about the diverse water resources. So there are 2 teams competing here in California. There's a 3rd team that we know of that is not based in California. So it is essential that the financial support recommended by the board be brought to bear to make both of our teams as strong as they can possibly be. The full innovation ecosystem here in California and beyond is represented on both teams. And we have excellent partners, both teams have excellent partners from across the country to ensure that we are also nationally competitive. I will close by saying that your support is critical to California's leadership here, and that we look forward to not only financial support, but a real partnership with the water boards to ensure that the development of technologies best address our resource challenges. I want to thank you for your time.
Thank you. Any questions, follow-up by board members? Well, let me just say that as, well, the only engineer sitting here right now, what you just said is music to my ears, and also what seems to be several lifetime ago now, I actually was director of Cal EPA's Office of Environmental Technology way back when, with the idea of helping the development of technology, not only from academia, but also through the commercialization and implementation stage. So what you are doing is wonderful. I do have a question for you. If we could go back to slide number 7. Hopefully I got my slide number correctly. Yes, I think this is the critical slide from my previous experience, getting the right people together to build that collaboration from research and technology development to investment in commercialization and acceptance is the key. My question is, given that there are these different hubs that will be created, has there been any discussion about exchanges between the hubs and perhaps developing some sort of reciprocity between the hubs so that a technology that goes through one hub is then accepted in other regions, in other areas, without having to go through and redo the testing? Has that kind of discussion been talked about?
So I should clarify that there will be a single water hub that the Department of Energy funds, that the Department of Energy has already indicated that the winning consortium, while it gets to plan out research, should be broadening its purview, not just to its own team members during the bidding process, but to bringing in partners from the other teams, those that have some highly competitive ideas as well. And what I will say is less about transfer of technology between hubs and more about working with the kinds of organizations that are already thinking about transferring technologies across the country. Our team, and I believe my colleague Peter Fisk's team as well, are both working with the Water Research Foundation. The Water Research Foundation, in collaboration with the Water Environment Federation, operates a program called LIFT, which is all about helping to accelerate technology and accelerate the geographic transfers of technology. They have a network of test beds across the country so that not only can tests be replicated, but data on various tests can be shared. And it is our intent to collaborate closely with WRF, the Water Research Foundation, WEF, Water Environment Foundation, and their LIFT and testbed network platform to ensure that technologies that high-functioning technologies are propagated out as fast as possible.
Excellent. Thank you. I look forward to hopefully this being a successful effort and hearing back on the success of the outcomes. I like that you've used not only actions, but also activities, but also outcomes as measure of this effort.
Thank you.
Right. I do not have any other. Oh, hang on. Let me check. All right. We have a commenter, Mr. Bob Gore, representing the city of Fresno.
Robert Gore from the Gualco Group on behalf of the city of Fresno. The city has spoken with DFA on a number of occasions, and we stand ready to assist in any sort of research in which a municipality may participate with our own funding. Fresno has passed a Prop 218 measure. We're in a significant financial partnership with the Water Board on several facilities, and we're prepared to lend a hand when and where appropriate. Thank you.
Great. All right, with that, I am more than happy and pleased and honored to move this item with the change sheet.
Okay.
I am on top of things, Mr.
You
Moore.
are on top of things. I apologize that I didn't mention that earlier.
All right. I don't need a second, I believe. All right. Then all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you very much. Do we need to take a break, or are all your people here? All right. Let's get the storms speakers up, please. Thank you for accommodating our change in order. We are just so eager to hear from you.
No problem.
Ms. Sobek, do you wish to make any introductory remarks?
No, this is an informational item, and we're just going to have staff provide the status and recommendations from 2 projects that are implemented under the Storms program. So I think we could just turn it over to the panel.
All right, Ms. Carrara.
Good morning, board members. My name is Annalisa Kihara, Chief of the Storms Unit in the Division of Water Quality. This is, like Ms. Sobek had mentioned, this is an information item on our storms project and what we've been doing up to date, and a couple of projects that we'd like to share some of the products that have recently come out. With me today, to my right, I have Jeffrey Albrecht with the Storms Unit. He is project manager of one of our projects related to funding of stormwater programs and projects. To his right is Chris Began, also with the Storms Unit. He is the project manager of our project promoting stormwater capture and use. And to Chris's right is Brian Courier with Sacramento State Office of Water Programs. Brian Courier in Office of Water Programs was one of our contractors for our project. So just to provide some background, the stormwater strategy was approved by the board in January of 2016. In the strategy, we identified an overarching vision where stormwater is sustainably managed and utilized in California, with the mission to advance the perspective that stormwater is a valuable resource. As part of the stormwater strategy, we identified 23 total projects that we committed to implementing and phased those projects into 3 phases. So what we've been up to lately has been implementing the first 9 projects in our stormwater strategy. And so today, our info item will be an update on, first, it is our project to promote funding for stormwater capture and use projects, which is a staff report that Jeff Albrecht will be presenting, followed by Chris Began and Brian Courier, who will be providing an update on a contract product report on our project to promote stormwater capture and use and eliminate barriers to stormwater capture and use. So what the presenters will share is what was done during implementation of the projects, who we coordinated with, and the resulting recommendations. And with that, I will pass it on to Jeff.
Good morning, members of the board. The objective of the Stormwater Funding Project is to identify funding opportunities and address barriers to stormwater projects and programs. So the outcome of this project is 8 recommendations for potential action by State Water Board staff that I will be summarizing today. Of course, all the information that I'll be discussing is summarized in further detail in the stormwater funding report that will be posted to the Storms website shortly. So what we did, in support of this project, we participated in quarterly meetings with our Stormwater Funding Subcommittee, which includes the same members of the Storms Implementation Committee, plus a number of additional stakeholders. The subcommittee helped guide the project and provided valuable feedback on the recommendations as they were developed. Over the course of the project, we evaluated common barriers, identified a variety of funding opportunities, and evaluated the accessibility of the funding. We also considered multiple benefit type approaches to funding stormwater projects, such as supporting water supply, addressing flood control, and urban greening benefits. So we also took advantage of opportunities to share our findings through targeted outreach. We presented at the 2016 and 17 CASCA conferences, participated in the California Stormwater Finance Forums in coordination with the US EPA, and invited attorney Michael Colantuno to speak on municipal finance strategies as part of the Storms seminar series. As I mentioned before, the Stormwater Funding Subcommittee was essential in guiding and informing the project. This is a list identifying the majority of the stakeholders, but not all, that participated in the project development and provided feedback on the recommendations. The number of stakeholders interested in this project, I think, is indicative of the ongoing challenge of solving the stormwater funding equation, and their participation was essential, and I want to be sure and thank all of them for their participation. So this is a summation of the 8 recommendations from the staff report. They have been grouped and color-coded in order of prioritization, considering timelines, resources, likely attainment, and overall value to stormwater funding objectives. So green is for our current efforts, blue is for near-term actions, and orange is for our potential future actions. And so I want to clarify that there may be additional funding opportunities out there, but these recommendations have been constrained to within the State Water Board's sphere of influence. So for our current efforts, we have 2 recommendations related to SB 231 and a stormwater pilot project funded through our Drinking Water State Revolving Fund. So the recommendation to track SB 231 legislation will be for the possible stormwater fee development, and will follow the efforts of the SB 231 work group seeking approval of municipal stormwater fee based on the updated language associated with Prop 218. We will be following any legal challenges to the effort, and pending validation of the language, we will disseminate that information as appropriate through our Division of Financial Assistance and post the information on the new CASCA Stormwater Funding website, which I will also be discussing shortly. So the idea to facilitate a Drinking Water State Revolving Fund pilot project. So the next recommendation is to facilitate a stormwater capture project through the Drinking Water SRF. So in 2014, AB 2403 updated Prop 218 definition of water to mean water from any source. The pilot project would leverage that clarification to fund a stormwater capture project for the benefit of a drinking water supply. So we are currently facilitating a project proposal by the Santa Margarita Water District through the application process with hopes of establishing a clear path for future multiple benefit projects. The pilot has already revealed some barriers, including US EPA guidance that states dams and reservoirs are ineligible. Of course, the installation of inflatable dams may be an essential component of other stormwater capture projects, but they are not considered eligible currently, so that's pending for further clarification. And that is essentially what the Santa Margarita Water District project is proposing to do. So in addition to these types of projects, they also may trigger water right concerns for downstream communities, and so that is something else that will need to be addressed with a defined process.
When it comes to the issue with EPA and dams and reservoirs, is that going to require a change in federal statute, or are we able to get an administrative clarification or anything, or is there any thought as to how to get past that?
It is something that we are currently working to address with EPA. So their guidance does not elaborate on the term of dams and reservoirs, unfortunately. So it tends to capture that idea of an inflatable dam. They do have a deviation process where you can ask for an exception to their guidance. So we're looking into that also. But I think overall we'd like to have a clarification that inflatable dams are not the intent of their language of dams and reservoirs, because it is a great idea that could be recycled up and down the coast to capture those flows just before they are lost to the ocean.
So let me jump in and just to provide a little bit of background. One of the issues about funding is that there isn't a dedicated source in most cases for stormwater. And if you can link it up with your water supply, then you have a dedicated source. And so this is the idea of evaluating and looking for barriers and ways to address that through private projects, of finding projects that could access the drinking water state revolving fund for stormwater capture that leads to municipal supply.
Okay, so these are the 4 near-term actions that I'm going to summarize next. So the first near-term recommendation is the development of a dedicated California stormwater funding website in partnership with CASCA. The intent is to have multiple stormwater project planning and funding resources in one location. This would include local funding options, development of a stormwater utility, Prop 218 resources, including the impacts of SB 231, current funding opportunities, project cost estimation, O&M resources, and case studies on various funding approaches. CASCA is actually very close to awarding a contract for the development of the site content very soon, and it's quite possible that this website could be active before the end of the year. The next recommendation is to develop outreach material on stormwater program needs and benefits in coordination with the US EPA. This recommendation recognizes the nuances of messaging to the public and the need to develop effective talking points for elected officials. The outreach material needs to answer the questions of how do you convey the value of a stormwater project to the public, and what is the benefit to the general public? Effective messaging is essential to developing good community support for stormwater management projects and would likely determine whether or not a project receives the funding it needs to move forward. The objective of the 5th recommendation is to leverage the financial strength of the Clean Water State Revolving Fund to improve stormwater funding accessibility. This would be accomplished by considering creative solutions proven effective in other states and the evaluation of alternative financing options by our Division of Financial Assistance, such as loan guarantees, the securitization of debt obligations, enhanced technical assistance for stormwater programs, additional subsidization options. Although it needs to be acknowledged that the CDSRF is currently oversubscribed, so any efforts to evolve the funding options for stormwater programs would still prove challenging. The 6th recommendation seeks to take advantage of the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, aka the cap and trade funds. These funds are managed through the California Climate Investment Program and must demonstrate greenhouse gas emission reductions. So in accordance with AB 32, the California Air Resources Board is responsible for the adoption of methodologies quantifying the greenhouse gas emission reductions. So this project would support the efforts to develop a quantification methodology based on the logic that local stormwater capture efforts that supplement local water supplies would result in reduced water transport pumping and therefore less energy use. The recommendation also includes advocating for cap and trade funding allocations to these types of stormwater capture projects to increase awareness of stormwater's role in addressing climate change.
So on that note, I know the Climate Registry is currently undergoing a process to, under the energy water nexus, to quantify on a voluntary basis greenhouse gas emissions and begin to track reductions and how water utilities might best be able to account for their energy use in their operations. And so I know this is stormwater, but I wonder if there isn't a way to kind of team up with the Climate Registry in their current effort to see if they might be able to also incorporate things like stormwater utilizing stormwater and then the potential greenhouse gas reductions from not importing in water or whatever else it might be. So just to flag that.
Yes, agreed. And we intend to participate in their upcoming workshops with that registry.
Fantastic.
Okay, finally, there are two potential future actions identified in the staff report covering local resource capacity and evolutions to the MS4 permit. So the recommendation to develop local resource capacity would be done in collaboration with the US EPA, and it is intended to develop the long-term planning and financial capacity resources needed at the municipal level. The guidance would cover capital improvement cost estimation tools, and long-term operation and maintenance needs. The development of a circuit rider program to reach out to the small or disadvantaged communities is also recommended. And finally, we have recommended that the State Water Board collaborate with the US EPA and support their current efforts to developing creative MS4 compliance approaches. So the evolutions to the MS4 permit could include credit trading as a compliance option, then potentially resulting in improved coordinated funding efforts. And it is recognized that any changes to the MS4 permitting would require the clear compliance pathways for permittees. And with that, that concludes my portion of the presentation.
Okay. We're now going to move on to the next update on our Office Water Program's contract product report to promote stormwater capture and use and eliminate barriers to stormwater capture and use. This is a contract report that was recently finalized and will be posted on our website after this meeting. The next step on this series of projects for stormwater capture and use is to take this product and to create a staff report. And it would be a staff report that would be more of a draft guidance for municipalities addressing legal and technical barriers to implementing stormwater capture and use projects. And so that would be brought before the board around this time next year. So I will pass it on to Chris Began.
Thank you, Annalisa. Good morning, board members. The objective of this project was to develop strategies and goals to help foster and incentivize stormwater capture and use, as well as identify actions that could help eliminate regulatory and technical barriers. Before I get too far, I just wanted to say that funding was a big issue associated with capture and use. We tried to separate our project from Jeff's project, but again, funding comes up. But we worked hand in hand together on both these projects. Oops, I always do that. Before I get too far, I wanted to point out why stormwater capture and use is important for California. Stormwater represents a local and underutilized source. Dry weather flow, wet weather storm events can represent a significant source of water, up to 600,000 acre feet from one source. Further, stormwater capture and use reduces pollutant loading in waterways. It can restore depleted aquifers, restore natural watershed processes, and provide for more sustainable water supplies. So just to put everything in perspective, who's capturing stormwater right now? Well, in water scarce areas, water suppliers recognize the need to incorporate stormwater capture and use in order to achieve a more sustainable water portfolio. The water suppliers are able to build large regional infiltration basins. They also have the technical, political, and legal expertise in-house to address water rights and adjudicated basins. They have modeling expertise, and of course, they have rate-setting expertise. They also have long-term partnerships with flood control districts, so they have access to infrastructure. And further, and probably perhaps most important, is suppliers are able to pass costs on to ratepayers. So in contrast, let's just talk a little bit about municipal stormwater permittees. They're motivated primarily by permit requirements. For them, it's a compliance issue. It's not a commodity. They're also limited by catchment size, the amount of runoff, the infrastructure, the existing resources available to them, and finally, the expertise and experience to address capture and use. So for our project, we focused on municipalities, and we, with less of an emphasis on water suppliers. So the questions that we were asking ourselves of this project was, what are the critical barriers that limit municipal capture and use of urban runoff today? And along that line, do our policies, plans, and permits inhibit or foster capture and use of urban runoff? Finally, what other actions can be done to foster and encourage capture and use by the municipalities? So what we did, I'm not going to read all this, but we assembled a couple technical advisory group, public advisory group with stakeholders. We performed a literature review. We also solicited from the stakeholders and interested parties case studies. And actually, we developed a survey for those representatives that had case studies, because we wanted to talk to people or get information from people that had been through, they've completed successful projects, because they had it from start to finish. They hit barriers all the way along. We wanted to get that input from them. As far as outreach, again, we held workshops here with the PAG, with the TAC. We presented at the Cascade Annual Conference 2016, 2017. We did some local industry. We presented at some local industry-related workshops, and then most recently at the Casco Quarterly meeting in January 2018. And then this is just a list of people. So it's just, there's a number of regional boards in there. Our friends at the Department of Water Resources, EPA, academics such as Brian from Sacramento State, University of California is well represented, CASA, CASQA, Public Works, the municipalities themselves, as well as a number of consultants in there that they kind of have a lot of experience working on these types of projects in Southern California. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Brian Courier from Office of Water Programs at Sacramento State, and he's going to explain some of the details of their findings.
Thank you, Chris. Good afternoon or good morning, members of the board. I'm Brian Courier of Sacramento State's Office of Water Programs. Office of Water Programs is part of a nonprofit auxiliary to Sacramento State. This project compiles information from case studies, as Chris was talking about, and from an extensive literature review. We organize some of that feedback in the next couple of slides, and I'll highlight a few key observations. First, I'll just, in this slide, organize your attention around the topic of benefits. And what we found with these projects is there's a lot of terminology that vary between region and between jurisdictions. And so what we did is, on the left there, on that first column, we identified key management components that one might look at and use in a stormwater capture technology or application. And then there's really two key points that probably about as much as you could read here up on the header, and that is there's 3 types of capture and use that we identified, and there's a nice handful of ancillary benefits with kind of some broad brainstorming on what kind of ancillary benefits you might get from each of these treatment components. And we thought that this might be a helpful step in starting to identify the key components to achieve both different uses and ancillary benefit. And we'll talk about the importance of multi-benefit in a minute here. One of the take-homes here, and again, more details in the report, but when we look at ancillary benefits, it does jump out at me a bit that the shallow infiltration evapotranspiration type of component we would see in stormwater infrastructure, and we can also think of that as low impact development or green infrastructure. that really hits on a lot of ancillary benefits. I mean, we're really managing water at the landscape level, and so that's probably why it tends to hit on many of these different ancillary benefits. Now, along the lines of what Chris was talking about with water districts and their main strategy, I'd also draw your attention that deep infiltration really has the potential to hit on all three, unlike any other component. You have that component in your capture application, you're really could hit on all three of our intended uses. And then finally, one of the ultimate uses of stormwater, of course, sometimes a bit expensive, but direct use. And you'll see that that hits not just on a couple of the key uses, but on many ancillary benefits. So moving on, wanted to talk about the factors affecting success. So Chris was explaining how when we talk to the project proponents of successful projects, they really had a lot of feedback from us on some of the key barriers that they had to overcome. So what we did is up on the first row in the header, we really organized a lot of barriers into a few categories you see here, and we labeled them of these factors affecting success, and we organized those according to our three uses, the scale of the project, and whether that was public or private. And a couple things jump out at us. First, we weren't surprised that the funding mechanism is key. Like, it doesn't really matter what we're doing in the public sector, we have to figure out a way to pay for it. So that was no surprise and follows Jeffrey's comment on funding. The next, though, was interesting to me, is that community support really jumped out. And so now we're starting to relate back to what Jeffrey talked about with tools to increase community support and political support. And then in the last slide, kind of looking across those ancillary benefits, the more benefits you can show a community, the argument is that it's we can increase the support. And so that, I think, was kind of a key observation for us. And then finally, one about scale is if you look across here, if we're just doing the decentralized little low-impact developments here and there, depressed planters, and we don't have to overcome the same barriers, but as we increase scale, we increase economy of scale. We start to capture water in maybe a reportable quantity to our water district, and in that increase in scale, though, we also have many more barriers for these municipalities. And remember, as Chris was saying, they're already at a very small scale, and the entire municipality itself as a watershed is probably a small scale compared to what a water district might typically pull from. So it's just probably a confirmation of the challenge that they face as they try to scale up for regional projects. So I'm just going to summarize a few of what we suggest are the key findings of this project. The first is that urban runoff can provide a sizable source of water supply. Chris shared some numbers earlier as maybe an upward potential for capture. And then we were asked and quite happy to assist DWR in some target setting exercises that is actually ongoing. So very, very pleased that they reached out to us on that. The next finding is that aquifers are really our least expensive storage solution. We found that if you're trying to capture stormwater in our mostly arid climate and save it to when we need it or get it to where it can be used, it becomes quite expensive. And building those systems where you're building the storage, not just for a single storm, but to carry over several storms. And the key to cost effectiveness seems to be to get it into a useful aquifer. Another item was that projects that increase on-site retention reduce liability associated with discharges to surface waters. We don't think it's a coincidence that some of our, or many of our case studies came from Southern California, where they're well into their alternative compliance path infrastructure implementation. And the next is that key finding was that on the technology side, we really found that the technology exists and some of the barriers were really perceived. You know, one of the items that we'll often hear is, well, I don't have much space, or my soils, my near surface soils are rather poor. And in that case, a lot of communities are turning to dry wells that actually deal with both of those barriers. So the technology exists. The next is that capture and use can have consequences. So this is where I talk out of the other side of my mouth and say, well, we could be impacting groundwater. So there is some care that needs to be involved. And also, as we capture urban runoff, there might have been habitat that's developed in response to that flow regime change from development. So we do have ecosystem impacts, both positive and negative. And finally, and kind of maybe this is my thread throughout my talk here, is valuation of capture and use across those many benefits is going to be key, we think, to increase community and political support. Okay, so here's some recommendations moving forward, color-coded just like Jeffrey had provided. Green is going to be current projects and blue near term, and I'll jump into those. So current actions, I'm happy to report on this slide that Storms has moved forward and continues to move forward in partnership with CASCA on getting funding information to the public and municipalities. Also, on this next action to resolve regulatory and policy issues regarding dry wells, they've already contracted for technical support to support this particular project. Right, in the next two slides, I'll present projects 3 through 6. And in my mind, they're all interrelated or interdependent. The first idea here is to expand or improve or clarify our regulatory performance measures for capture and use. A couple notes here that certainly could be done within the post-construction requirement. That might be seen as a little bit of a stick. A carrot might be to create an incentive within alternative compliance pathways, an explicit incentive for capture and use projects. And then the other note here is that to identify as we move forward the most effective and feasible strategies. We've organized these actions with identifying lead agencies and goals, and here it seems natural Water Board would have purview here, and the goal is to establish at least a general guideline, I would say, of when capture and use requires additional study or should just outright be avoided. And if a municipality kind of had that sense of where they needed to do additional study, that would create perhaps a nice set of projects or circumstances where they really have a clear path. And they would have this understanding that they're kind of on solid ground to pursue a capture and use project. So that really brings in the rest of these items. Number 4, project 4 is to assess the framework for ecological impacts, positive and negative, that I just alluded to earlier. And we think that's probably a partnership between Water Board and Department of Fish and Wildlife. And again, to look at reducing negative impacts associated with capture and use. It's not just about, in our understanding of the issue, it's not just about returning to natural hydrologic processes and historic flows, but we have habitat loss, and then we have habitat gains from dry weather flow, and so we have habitat values that exist right now from that change in regime. So that conversation we suggest should happen with Department of Fish and Wildlife. Number 5 here is to really take the work that we've done in stormwater resource planning, a lot of good work, often appended to our integrated regional water management plans, and really bring that to the forefront of the plans themselves. I mean, an example would be, we often see this allocation of water sources within our integrated water management plans. Well, it'd be nice to see what slice of the pie stormwater represents for each community. And that way we really understand kind of what our targets are in capture and use in a regional context. And then finally, we had the idea that general plans themselves could explicitly require developers perhaps be above a certain threshold in size to consider capture and use as part of their water portfolio. And certainly there's a recommendation, or at least there's room for that in the regulations for general plans or the guidelines. And we think that that could be strengthened. We think that's probably, again, a partnership with another agency, the Governor's Office of Planning and Research, but then also would take some local government action, because then they would actually have to update those general plans. And there, the goal is to ensure early consideration of stormwater capture and integration into the water portfolio for that community. So those were just a few of the items coming out of the report, and much more is contained in the report, and I'll turn it back over to Annalisa.
Thanks, Brian. I did just want to add that on the current action number 2 that Brian had mentioned about the contract regarding dry wells. We do have that current contract that was recently executed with Geosyntec, and what they're doing is putting together statewide standards for stormwater capture and dry infiltration wells. And we have an advisory group that we recently created that will, the first meeting will be at the end of August 28th. We also have been coordinating with both Julie Haas and Mike Floyd with Department of Water Resources, because we recognize that they do have the well standards in Bulletin 7481 under their purview. And so we want to make sure that we're coordinating with one another, because I believe there may be some future plans to update their well standards. And then with that, I also wanted to share that we are obtaining currently stakeholder input on these recommendations, as well as phase 2 projects. So primarily right now we have conversations going on with our Storms Core Implementation Committee. So those are the stakeholders with representation from CASCWA, AQUA, California Coastkeeper Alliance, SEEB, and CASA. And so part of that conversation is really looking at all of these projects and the recommendations, and just identifying which ones would lend itself to additional storms projects in future iterations of the strategy, what can maybe be addressed through contract funding, and then also most recently we created the California Stormwater Authority Joint Powers Authority. So potentially some of these projects can be addressed through that mechanism as well.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? What about some of the other activities under storms? When do we expect to hear updates from you all? By the way, thank you. Thank you for the excellent report and obviously all the hard work you've been doing. And as you know, I'm always fond of pushing you along. So what about the other efforts, and when might we expect similar updates on them?
So when the stormwater strategy was approved by the board, we did commit to providing updates. I think it was about every 6 months. And usually around that time, we'll coordinate with our executive management just to identify whether or not it would lend itself to an info item or an executive director's report. Some upcoming projects that will likely make its way to kind of the public forum will be related to a lot of our source control related projects, zinc in the urban environment, as well as our urban pesticides project, because we're currently coordinating with DPR and an update of their memorandum, their management agency agreement.
All right, looking forward to hearing more about that. We do have one speaker card for this item, Mr. Daniel Apt.
Good morning, board members. Thank you for the opportunity to provide public comment today. My name is Daniel Apt, and I currently serve as the chair of the board of directors of the California Stormwater Quality Association. And I also serve as one of CASCA's representatives on the Core Storms Implementation Committee. CASCA strongly supports the State Water Board Storms Initiative and is actively participating not only in the Core Implementation Committee, but also as part of many of the storms projects. CASCA has a vision and strategic actions for managing stormwater in the 21st century that was recently updated in 2017. And our vision statement is to manage stormwater as a vital component of California's water resources in a sustainable manner, to support human and ecological needs, to protect water quality, and to enhance and restore our waterways. Our vision aligns closely with the Storms Initiative and many of the storms projects, and I would like to highlight CASCA's support for recommendations identified in the 2 storms projects that were presented today and how they relate to the CASCA vision. For the projects 1A and 1B, stormwater capture and use, these projects closely align with the CASCA vision, especially action 1.2, identifying constraints and opportunities for maximizing stormwater as a resource. And CASCA supports the following recommendations identified in the Project 1A and 1B report. Explore options for funding stormwater capture and use. This aligns closely with CASCA's Vision Action 2.7, which is to create funding opportunities for stormwater. Expand and improve regulatory performance measures to reflect capture and use objectives. This aligns with CASCA's Vision 2.2, which is to clarify regulations. Improve consideration of urban stormwater capture and use in integrated regional water management plans. This aligns with CASCA's Vision 1.1, which is to develop guidance for integrated management of water resources that promotes stormwater as a resource. Require the use that capture and use planning for developers and municipal planners be adopted into city and county ordinances governing entitlements. This aligns with CASCA's Vision Action 1.2, which is to identify constraints and opportunities for maximizing stormwater as a resource.
Really quick on that item, do we know of any cities, counties, or municipalities that have done that, that have incorporated, stormwater capture and to a greater extent in their general plans?
Not that I saw. I can't say it doesn't exist.
And then associated with Project 4B, eliminating barriers to funding stormwater programs and identifying funding for stormwater capture and use. This project aligns closely with CASCA's vision, especially Action 2.7, which is creating funding opportunities. CASCA supports the recommendations identified in the Project 4B report as follows. The state legislation, SB 231, and stormwater fee development, which aligns closely with Action 2.7, creating funding opportunities. And we have specific objectives to participate in the SB 231 implementation working group that Jeffrey Albrecht mentioned, as well as developing and planning a strategy for its implementation. Drinking Water State Revolving Fund pilot project, which aligns closely with our Action 2.7, creating funding opportunities. Supporting the development of a CASCA stormwater funding website, which aligns with Action 2.7. And just a quick update on that, been working closely with Jeffrey Albrecht to get that project going. CASCA has selected a team of consultants, and we're currently in the contracting phase. We do plan to have that website up by the end of the year. And then as far as stormwater public messaging, this aligns closely with CASCA Action 3.1, which is creating opportunities for multiple agency and collaborative efforts to demonstrate the value of stormwater to the public, and Action 3.2, which is creating a statewide message that establishes stormwater as a resource in California. And then building local capacity, this aligns with Action 2.7 as well as Action 2.8, which is surveying the needs and identifying costs for stormwater programs. And finally, evolving municipal stormwater separate storm sewer system permits, which aligns with CASCA Vision Action 2.2, which is to clarify regulations, and 2.4, developing policies and permitting framework to support sustainable stormwater management. I'd like to reiterate CASCA's support for the State Water Board Storms Initiative, and thank you again for this opportunity to provide public comment today.
Thank you. So glad to know we're so aligned. Any other comments, questions? If not, again, thank you, and thank you again for accommodating our change in order. With that, we'll take a break until 11 o'clock, and when we resume, please have staff already set up and prepared to proceed to that item. All right, it is 11 a.m. We are back in session, and Ms. Sobek, if you would please introduce item number 5.
Great, good morning, board members. Board members Esquivel, Dodek, and Diadamo. My name is John Borkovich. I'm the Groundwater Monitoring Section Chief in the Division of Water Quality. I'm joined here today by Eric Gilman, our attorney with the Office of Chief Counsel, Justin Turner, Chief Counsel with the Department of Conservation, and last but not least, Shala Farnak, Assistant Deputy Director of the Division of Water Quality. We're here to present for your consideration a proposed resolution authorizing the Executive Director to finalize and execute a revised memorandum of agreement between the State Water Resources Control Board and the Department of Conservation Division of Oil, Gas, and Geothermal Resources regarding underground injection control, discharges to land, and other program issues. And that is one sentence. Today we'll begin with a presentation by Eric Gilman, and we will be available for questions following the presentation. And now I'll turn it over to Eric Gilman.
Morning, board members. My name is Eric Gilman. Thank you for giving us an opportunity to come present the draft MOA, which is a revision to the 1988 MOA between DOGGR, the Division of Oil, Gas, Geothermal Resources of the Department of Conservation, and the State Water Board. The purpose of the revisions that we're presenting today is to reflect updates to have the agencies cooperate in regulating oil and gas discharges. The primary focus of the revisions is to the Class 2 underground injection control program and how, like I said, the agencies cooperate in regulating that program. Just as a bit of background, Class 2 wells are defined under the Safe Drinking Water Act as oil and gas related, specifically used to inject fluids for enhanced oil recovery, which could be something like steam or water flood, or to dispose of fluids produced in oil and gas operations, and those fluids are commonly referred to as produced water. The MOA outlines how the agencies cooperate in an area of overlapping authority. Generally speaking, we've got two main program areas at issue. One is the UIC program, and the other is discharges of produced water to land. So generally speaking, DOGGR is the lead agency when it comes to regulating the Class 2 program, to administering the Class 2 program, and the water boards take the lead in permitting where appropriate discharges of produced water to land or to ponds. DOGGR administers the Class 2 program under delegated authority from US EPA under an MOA that they executed, I think, in the early 80s. And just to be clear, this MOA does not cover well stimulation, or otherwise known as fracking. The agencies developed an MOA back in 2014 that covers cooperation in that area. Yeah, you can actually go, yeah. So moving on to the scope of the MOA, which I've already sort of touched upon, there's the Class 2 injection program. There's the discharge of produced water to land. And we've also expanded the MOA to cover some other sort of related program areas, incident response, spills, enforcement coordination, information sharing, and compliance with the Business and Professions Code related to professional stamping for geologists and engineers. Could you just stay back on? Yeah, Stan, thank you. So the Class 2 program, which again is sort of driving these revisions, can be broken up into two areas. One is aquifer exemptions, the other is UIC projects. So again, as a bit of background, aquifer exemptions are designations under the Safe Drinking Water Act that an aquifer, which contains below a certain amount of salinity, in this case, fewer than 10,000 milligrams per liter total dissolved solids, is appropriate for Class 2 injection. Some aquifers meet these characteristics, others don't. And basically, both the aquifer exemption and the UIC project section lays out a detailed process for sharing information between the agencies. It lays out a process for water boards, review and commenting on aquifer exemptions and UIC project proposals, and a process for, as necessary, incorporating water quality conditions into aquifer exemptions or UIC projects. That's a very high-level summary, and can certainly go into more detail if you'd like. But I would just point out before moving on, the section on discharges to land is largely unchanged from the original 1988 MOA. So yeah, now maybe this is a good time to pause if there are any questions about substance. Otherwise, I can move on to describing the public outreach and public comment processes.
So just to clarify for me, the MOA focuses, I think what I heard you say, is it focuses on the processes and procedures between the two agencies. It by itself does not necessarily contain or describe all other processes involved in implementation of these programs, whether it be by DOGGR or by us. This is just focused on our internal processes.
That's correct.
So issues such as monitoring, public participation would be outside of the scope of the MOA.
Public participation, yes, is outside of the scope. We do describe monitoring in the MOA and how we would interact around a potential condition that the water boards might want to incorporate into a UIC project.
But not specific criteria requirements for monitoring specifically associated with these activities.
That's correct. Yeah. Okay, so moving on to the comment process. Back in March, we circulated a draft of the revised MOA to stakeholders, and we got a number of comments back, primarily from industry and NGO groups. We processed those comments internally and also with DOGGR and made some revisions based on those comments. So we had a new version that was put out in sort of a clean version, if you will, in late May. We ran a 30-day comment period. We received comments from largely the same commenters that commented in the first place. Some of them are listed here on the slide: CBD, Clean Water Action, some industry groups. And then based on those comments, which we reviewed internally and then also with DOGGR, we made additional changes which are in the show in the strike-through version, which is available on the website, and you may have before you now. At this point, like to go over significant comments, some that we adopted, made changes in the MOA, and others that we have not. We can sort of walk through those. So one comment that came up from industry was to reconcile the data requirement checklist, which is an attachment in the appendix to the MOA, laying out sort of what the agencies are looking for, particularly what the water boards are looking for when an operator proposes a UIC project. There was a comment to reconcile that checklist with Dogger's proposed modifications to their UIC regs, and we have done that. They were largely the same, but there were maybe a couple minor differences. We've now reconciled those two. Dogger's getting ready to put that draft out for public comment here shortly. Another comment we got from industry was clarification regarding the professional geologist, professional engineer stamping requirement. There's concern that maybe we were asking for more than the businesses and professions code required. That's not the case, so we just used some language that was suggested to make that change. We got a comment to include a tracking system for aquifer exemption proposals, similar to the one that we have for UIC projects, which is already up on our website. And we're going to go ahead and do that. We incorporated it into it. We actually already are tracking the exemptions. We've been providing them to US EPA in regular updates. So what we'll do is we'll just add that to the website, but there's a specific provision in the MOA that calls for that. We received some comments regarding concerns over references to the state and/or regional boards. I think that there was a worry that we might not be coordinating between the state and the regional boards, and that operators might get distinct sets of questions. That's not the case. We work closely together with the regional boards, and we speak as one unit. But we did, take steps to try and clarify that in the MOA. So you'll see some changes there. Lastly, on some of the changes that we adopted was an addition of a process for enforcing conditions in project approval letters that are so the water quality conditions that we would like to see that are incorporated in Dogger's PALs.
Could you go into more detail on that process?
Sure. The MOA is sort of basic in a sense. It calls for, as necessary, specifying how a condition will be complied with or monitored or basically tracked. But the bigger picture is that the mechanism for enforcing these conditions is through Dogger's enforcement authority in the first instance. Dogger has the authority, and I'll turn it over to Justin as appropriate, and you can certainly feel free to ask questions, to issue a remedial order or an order to cease injection. They have, like we do, the ability to levy administrative civil liability. So that would be the first line. I mean, after water boards working with operators to try and obtain compliance sort of informally, you could always go that route. And then as a last backup, we retain all of our authority under the water code. We can issue informational orders and get those processes running where we would have all the tools at our disposal to secure enforcement. Moving on to some significant comments that have not been incorporated at this time. Probably the main comment that we received from industry was desire to see timelines for reviews of particularly UIC projects. This MOA outlines sort of new processes. We have some experience, but in working with Dogger on reviewing UIC projects, a significant amount with aquifer exemptions. But in the context of UIC projects, all of the processes outlined in the MOA, not all of them have been adopted yet. We're still working on that. So basically, the agencies need time to see how long it's going to take to review these projects. We don't want to throw out numbers that are not realistic. What we want to be able to do is provide reliable guidelines as a reference to industry to help them in making, in planning, to manage expectations. And the idea, and we've discussed this with our, with the regulated community, is to, down the road, 6 months or a year out, revisit after we have more experience working under the MOA, revisit this issue, and then we could potentially work timelines in. That's the commitment that we made. Another concern that was raised by industry was the ability to review water quality conditions prior to the issuance of a project approval letter. We didn't think that this was appropriate to insert in the MOA. Again, as you pointed out, this is an agreement between the two agencies as to how we interact. It's not focused on our interactions with the operators, but in practice, operators have this sort of access prior to issuance of a PAL or prior to issuance of a concurrence letter from the water boards. We have made a practice of meeting with operators prior to issuance of a concurrence letter to work through potential limitations or conditions that we would put on in an aquifer exemption that would then be implemented at the project level to make sure we're on the same page and make sure that we have workable solutions for addressing water quality concerns. Another comment that we got was to include a public comment period in PALs. So again, we thought that this was not appropriate for the MOA between the agencies for one of the same reasons I just described. But there's also already a public comment process laid out in Dogger's MOA with USCPA, which calls for a 15-day publication in a local newspaper when a PAL is being issued, and a 15-day comment period. Another comment we got was a request to include mandatory groundwater monitoring for all PALs. We think that this is more appropriately dealt with on a case-by-case basis. There may be zones or projects where we don't think groundwater monitoring is appropriate, but in all cases where we do, we will include it. And as we discussed earlier, there are specific references to monitoring in the MOA as something that we would consider applying at the aquifer exemption or project level. And lastly, there was a request to include language to discontinue the permitting of produced water ponds in the MOA. Again, that's sort of a higher level policy call. The focus of the MOA is laying out the processes by which the agencies will share information and cooperate in the event that we do want to permit one of these ponds. So that wraps up my presentation. We're happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Any questions from board members? I do have 3 comment cards. We'll begin with Mr. Bob Gore, then Ms. Christine Zimmerman, and then Mr. Bill Aliout. I should know how to pronounce your name better than that, Bill, but apologies. Mr. Gore.
Fortunate to have a monosyllable name in both cases. Robert Gore from the Gualco Group on behalf of the California Independent Petroleum Association, whose 450 small and medium employer members live and work in the San Joaquin Valley and produce about 80% of the state's petroleum, which is all used in California, and about 90% of the natural gas. We'd like to thank staff for its 2 years of meticulous work in coordination with the Department of Conservation. Our members strongly support the continued effort for regulation without duplication and undue delays, and we look forward to continued collaboration in this endeavor. It's a very time-consuming, very meticulous, and again, we appreciate all of the staff efforts, and things have gotten better as time goes on with like any other a joint venture. On behalf of our smaller members who are extremely worried about the cost of doing business, we'd like to continue to express concern about the appropriate deployment of licensed professionals for someone who's a sole proprietor or it's a family business. It's an extreme cost, and we'll continue to coordinate with the board and the department in that. We're available to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gore. Ms. Zimmerman?
Opportunity to speak. My name is Christine Luther Zimmerman. I'm with Western States Petroleum Association, and I'm here today on behalf of our members. Firstly, thank you for the opportunity to comment on the proposed revised memorandum of agreement between the State Water Resources Control Board and the Division of Oil, Gas, and Geothermal Resources relating to the administration of the Underground Injection Control Program and surface discharges of Class II fluids in California. The Western States Petroleum Association, or WSPA, represents 25 companies that explore for, develop, refine, market, and transport petroleum and petroleum products in the western United States, including those representing the majority of domestic oil and gas production capacity in California. WSPA members have a strong interest in ensuring that the UIC program and related regulatory programs affecting oil and gas operations in the state are administered in a manner that takes into consideration the need for regulatory transparency, certainty, and efficiency. WSPA has already submitted written comments on the MOA on behalf of our members, which highlight several areas of concern and put forth reasoning for addressing these concerns into this interagency document. We continue to believe these recommendations outlined in our comment letter are important to ensure that the UIC program is implemented in an efficient, fair, and consistent manner, and we will continue to work towards obtaining implementation of our recommendations. Here today, we would like to reemphasize our primary concern that the MOA, by its own terms, is intended to create a coordinated approach to UIC program administration, and that to accomplish this purpose, specific timeframes for interagency review to better facilitate a fully coordinated and workable program should be included. The MOA continues to lack any specific timeframes for interagency review, comment, consultation, or any other process contemplated therein. After further consultation with the division and State Water Board, our members do recognize that establishing reasonable, realistic timeframes for the agencies must be guided by the practical realities of the UIC program. We appreciate at this time the division and State Water Board may not have sufficient information or practical experience to establish workable and reliable timeframes. We can also appreciate that an administrative reluctance to prematurely specify timeframes that may turn out to be inaccurate. We understand that. It is also important to note the division and the State Water Board's recent development of an online tracking system that allows operators to check on the status of their pending UIC permit applications. This is a noteworthy improvement to the UIC program and its regulatory transparency. While the tracking system is a useful tool for operators, however, it is best viewed as an interim solution that does not obviate the need for firm interagency timelines within the revised MOA. In closing, WSPA strongly encourages the division and State Water Board over the next 6 months to engage in a concerted effort to collect the additional information it needs to develop timeframes for review of aquifer exemption and UIC project applications, and to formally commit to revising the MOA within a year after its effective date to incorporate these timelines as they're developed. Thank you for your consideration of these comments on the proposed MOA, and we want to reiterate our willingness to work with staff in the development of permit approval review timelines for future inclusion in the MOA. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Zimmerman. let me try this again. Mr. Alayo.
Really, really close. Bill Alio, that's it. I'm with Environmental Working Group, and I'm also representing today, per our comment letter, Clean Water Action, the Central California Environmental Justice Network, and Natural Resources Defense Council. I think our main criticism of it was not having an annual review of the UIC projects, which is what's in the Dogger manual. I think we're understanding, though, of that may not be feasible, giving staffing. But I think it's important to acknowledge what's going on here. When we got involved with the Dogger programs in 2011, the water boards and Dogger were like two ships passing in the night and weren't talking very much, apparently, and ended up in the fiasco that we all know the UIC program was. And the state Senate held hearings on it, aquifers being polluted, et cetera. So we've come a long ways, and we're really glad to see this here. We support the new MOU. They've done a good job of cleaning up this stuff. And as when we go to the regional board in Rancho Cordova and comment on oil and gas projects, they're glad to see us there and acknowledge when we first started showing up about 5 years ago and thanked us, saying maybe they emphasized agriculture too much, and they now have many more staff working on the issue, as it should be. And of course, Dogger with new management, we think is on the right track. Not perfect yet, but this MOU is another piece in putting together a puzzle that makes Dogger a whole and complete state regulatory body. And we think the oil and gas industry has done a reasonably good job in California. We don't see spills into our water bodies and things very often. There's been a few bad operators. Dogger recently slammed one. But it was important. What you couldn't see was really important. And this MOU is part of fixing that problem. So we support it. And you've seen our comments and responded to them. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any question or comment? I would say in response to Ms. Zimmerman's comment that it would be my request that staff come back within a year and give us a report on the implementation of this MOA and whether or not it is feasible at that time to propose some timelines. You know, I'm a fond proponent of timelines and meeting those timelines, but I recognize that some additional experience is necessary. But I would like to have a check back in a year's time.
I just want to compliment you all for the work that you did with the stakeholders, and it just is very obvious that we've come a long way from a couple of years ago, and so really appreciate staff and stakeholder engagement in the process, and the work product reflects that. Thank you.
And the Department of Conservation and Dogger.
Yes.
Do I hear a motion?
Move to adopt.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. Thank you very much. Let me turn to my colleagues and ask if you have any board member reports. Yes, we're all looking at our calendars now. Yeah. Board Member Diodamo, would you like to start?
So I did several things last week, traveled to Big Pine, which is just outside of Bishop, where I, along with officials from Region 6, toured a trout hatchery facility and just learned about sort of the unique challenges that they have with the water supply and some naturally occurring chemicals that are in the water supply and management of the hatchery. They're doing very well, but taking actions to reduce mortality at the fish hatchery. And then I attended Region 6's board meeting, and the main items of interest, update from the cannabis unit, and then they had a workshop on their triennial review of their basin plan. And then on Friday, I traveled to Bakersfield and met with several water district officials within the Kern County Water Agency.
Nothing to report.
All right. I would just quickly report that Executive Director Sobek and I visited a cannabis cultivation site after an inspection was conducted by the local authorities in cooperation with the state as well as Central Valley Regional Water Board staff. It was my first time visiting such a site, and it was, I mean, we've seen photos, but as always, to be there and actually see the degradation and the activities and the water quality impacts associated with those activities was definitely informative. Also, it really made me appreciate all the work that our staff do. I mean, it's, you know, we adopted a policy, but there are staff out there on the ground working hard to implement those policy, conduct those inspection, enforcing those activities. So kudos and much gratitude to all the staff, both at the state as well as the regional board.
Where was the location generally?
Help me out, near Yuba City.
Oh, okay.
It was in Yuba County.
Right, Ms. Sobek, your report.
I'm going to let the report speak for itself this time around, unless you guys have any specific questions.
All right, thank you for an excellent report. With that, I don't believe we are not having closed session today, so that concludes our meeting for today. Thank you all. Goodbye.